Ladies and gentlemen, on this RedGamingTech video, let us discuss local compute versus the cloud. So someone recently tweeted Phil Spencer and asked his opinion of, quite simply, does he believe that this generation of consoles, the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, is going to be the last of its ilk? Is there going to be the PlayStation 5 hardware, or in his opinion, is it more likely to simply be in the cloud? I'm going to read you guys out what Phil has stated. He said, "I don't think so. I think local compute will be important for a long time." End quote. Now, I've done this as an article where I've gone into more of my opinions and so forth, done a little bit of rambling, and also given a link to Phil Spencer's tweet if you so desire to read it. It's pretty short, may I add. So, what are my thoughts on this? I'm actually quite vocal on this. Sometimes being vocal gets you into trouble, other times not so much, but hey, you know me guys, I just like to dive on in. So, Microsoft have been heavily invested in cloud-based technologies. I'm pretty sure most of us are aware that, of course, they are the owners of Azure, and Azure powers numerous things from business orientated programs all the way to dedicated servers for Xbox Live. It also, of course, does a cloud in different capacities for Xbox Live games. For example, AI on Forza or Titanfall, and also acts as a content delivery network for, say, maps you download and other patches and other bits and bobs. So it does a lot of different stuff. Sony, meanwhile, have jumped onto their own cloud service where you'll be able to stream PlayStation games, PlayStation Now, and it'll allow you to stream games at 720p from a local device, and then, of course, you can play it using a controller in pretty much the comfort of your own home. And it's great for what I'd consider lightweight devices, yeah? So that would be like the iPad, phones, things that don't really have much local processing power. I've gone into things such as NVIDIA's own Tegra systems recently, and it's quite potentially powerful. In raw G-flops, it's actually more than the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, but obviously it has some other issues. The other one is, let's take just for a moment a look at bandwidth. Now, bandwidth is always a problem, whether we're speaking about local memory bandwidth, for example, the GDDR5 memory on a local graphics card, or if we're discussing it for, say, a console, all the way down to downloading a game. Now, both Sony and Microsoft were originally considering their consoles at various stages in development simply not having a Blu-ray drive. And they considered basically just making their system fully digital. So pretty much it would be exactly like Steam is. Now, I love Steam for the PC, but one of the reasons that full retail copies of the games still haven't been completely phased out is because, in some cases, games are huge. Killzone Shadowfall for the PS4 weighs in at a smidgen under 40 gigabytes. Now, that takes a lot of bandwidth data up, and considering that some folks, may have an infinite unlimited data, like my package, I get throttled if I go over some amount per day. I honestly can't remember what it is because it's really hard for me to hit. I think it's like maybe 5 or 10 gigs of constant within like 4 hours or something like that. It's ridiculously high, but I pay for that. Let's put it that way. And I've got 120 megabyte MB connection, 120 MB connection. But I'm certainly fortunate. I know other people who are nowhere near that lucky, simply because they just happen to be slightly out of the area that I am, simply because they don't want to pay the premium pricing, just whatever reason, and their connection suffers. And so they might have like a half-speed connection with maybe half the amount of bandwidth, or they may have a really bad connection, like, say, 5 Mbps, which just about is enough for the PlayStation Now service streaming at 720p. let's put that into some context. 720p, this is like a big hoo-ha right now, I'm sure most of you are aware, about 720p versus 1080p, the resolution gate, blah blah blah. Certainly beyond the scope of this video, because I don't really want to go into old ground. Here's the thing. There are bandwidth compression issues and various other constraints that, of course, you've got to implement with a cloud-based service, right? Particularly with things that rely on instantaneous reactions. Games like StarCraft 2, which I'm bloody awful at, but, you know, some of those guys are averaging 200-300 clicks a minute. Not, you know, in a few minutes, in 1 minute. They've got a couple of hundred clicks. And, I mean, you've got to remember, some of these guys, it's basically, you get lag, you're dead. That's why fast computers, even though StarCraft 2 doesn't really require like a beast of a machine, unless you're dealing with huge amounts of units on screen. But even something that I'm a bit more familiar with, like a fighting game. Cloud gaming on a fighting, just imagine, for example, you've got your friend locally next to you, and you're both playing a game. Now, obviously, yes, it can do some deal of guesswork, and connections do that. For example, 3GPO, it was okay at doing some client-side guessing, but it's by no means a foolproof system. It's certainly better than not having any error correction, but it's not perfect. Plus, even if you discount that, let's say that you're discounting something like that. Let's say you're playing a game that doesn't necessarily require instantaneous reactions. So in other words, you know, 100, 200 ms of lag, whatever, which is basically the time it takes. Now, the resolution issue, you know, with 4K TVs coming out, that could be a problem. As I said, things such as lightweight clients, it could be great for. Now, there are other considerations. One of them, and I don't think that Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo or any of these guys would really like to admit this out loud, but is the bottom line. Right now, the major thing that these guys are doing is providing a platform, a hardware platform. Sure, Sony could publish, right? I could take my game to Sony say, wow, Paul, this is an amazing game. We're going to stump up the cash and we're going to advertise it for you. We're going to publish it for you. Okay, great. Let's just live in a fantasy land. Maybe I could do the same with Microsoft. Maybe Nintendo. Maybe they would publish it for me. Maybe they would. But that's exactly what Electronic Arts could do as well. The major difference is that they put out the PlayStation, they put out the Xbox, they put out the, you know, the 3DS or the Wii U or whatever. In other words, they're providing the hardware platforms to play the damn thing, which is kind of similar to, say, Steam with the PC, but very different in that, well, the PC is pretty open. My point being that for them to give this up, for them to basically go to a cloud service, it really does take a lot of control away from Sony or Microsoft. And when you consider that other companies are really powerful, like, for example, Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, and by no means are they the only ones, Activision, make ungodly amounts of money. What's to really stop them from start pushing their own cloud-based services? Maybe create like a very lightweight streaming hardware that doesn't really require that much cash up front, so they could just use it in an experiment. And sure, some of them are going to fail, some of them not so much, but if it's a cloud-based service, it's not really too difficult. Remember, if you were to look at Origin, and you were to look at, say, Uplay, that's pretty much all they've done. Have created their own cloud-based distribution, their own system. It's sure, arguably, Origin, not so much of a good reception compared to Steam. Uplay, same thing. They're getting better. I mean, honestly, and this is completely off topic, but the return policies from Electronic Arts Origin is just phenomenal if you compare it to Steam, which is something really Steam need to work at, in my personal opinion. It's really lousy compared to Origin, their return policy. So out of the scope of this video, but you should Google it. If you're ever considering buying the game and it's roughly the same price on both systems, like Origin and Steam, and you're like, which one should I buy? I don't know if I really want to get the game. You should definitely consider getting it from Origin, because the return policy on that is really robust. But that's beside the point. Also, the other issue with it, I like the idea of actually having the game in my own home. Sure, it's becoming less and less of a thing now of ownership, particularly as I'm mostly a PC gamer. Technically, you know, if Steam were to go belly up, there might not ever be a way for me to get hold of my games anymore. But I imagine there'll probably be some countermeasure. Certainly Gabe's muttered something about this in the past, but reality of the matter is I'm kind of his bitch. But this is very similar to, say, other situations. But the other real one, and something that Phil Spencer kind of hinted at, look, local computing right now it's barely touched anything. We're at 5 T-flops on average for a high-end PC part, right? 5 T-flops. A PS4 puts out 1.84 T-flops. This is not a PS4 versus PC, but I'm just using it to illustrate something. Right then, the 5 T-flop part is going to become really cheap within just a few years. It really is. If you were to compare it to something like, oh, I don't know, let's say the 8800 GTX, which was released late 2006, pretty much end of 2006. Nvidia, who created the 8800, also released the GTX 480. Now, the GTX 480 puts out 1.35 T-flops of computing power. This was put out very early 2010. The 8800 GTX puts out about 500 G-flops of computing power. So you're looking at almost 3 times the performance in about 3 years. Now, that is certainly impressive sounding, right? You know, pretty much within the you could look at it this way, that in 3 years' time, they've literally trebled the performance. It sounds impressive, but honestly, it's by no means the most impressive. There have been much more, there've been much larger, should I say, performance increases in the history of graphics cards and CPUs. And that's just really how it is. I mean, GPUs typically, some of the big releases can literally double the performance. So in other words, let's say you've got an SLI rig. Let's say, for example, you've got a GTX, oh, I don't know, 780. And let's say you've got an SLI. Let's say NVIDIA's next card, whatever the hell it's going to be released, but let's say the Maxwells are released in 3 months' time. That Maxwell could well have double the performance of a single GTX 780. Therefore, you've literally doubled the performance, in pure performance anyway. Obviously, there are some conditions and criteria that you'll have to assign to this, and of course we're speaking very generally. My point being, though, that by the time the PlayStation 5 decides to ordain us with its existence, we're most likely going to be seeing parts with at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times the performance of the PlayStation 4. We're going to be seeing memory amounts of at least 2, 3, 4, 5 times whatever it is the amount of the PlayStation 4. It's not really that difficult. In 3 or 4 years' time, the consoles are going to look pretty old, and that's just the way of things. And by that point, it's going to be cheap enough to, which is basically how a console evolves, right? You need hardware available that's cheap enough yet powerful enough compared to the previous generation to make it worthwhile to go through the whole process of actually designing another console. And that's all there is to it. So it's kind of a long-winded thing, this, but I've been wanting to discuss local compute versus the cloud for a while, and I figured this has been a way to run with it. And there's a lot more that I've missed out in this video. Some of it is going to be blindingly obvious, simply because of time constraints. Others it's just maybe that I haven't gotten around to speaking about, and others are just like, well, somewhat circumstantial. Reality, however, it's going to be a long time before we get rid of local compute. I think that definitely we're going to be seeing cloud gaming supplement. I think cloud gaming has its own place, and I think it's going to be great. But for now, I don't think it's going anywhere, and I think for the next 1 to 2 generations, despite the fact that analysts for the last several years have said, well, we certainly won't be seeing the PlayStation 3, well, we certainly won't be seeing the PlayStation 4, well, we certainly won't be seeing the PlayStation 5, and if you really look back at the history of things, this is what they've said: PCs will kill off consoles, consoles will kill off PCs, the cloud will kill off the PlayStation 4, there's definitely not going to be a PlayStation 5, and honestly, it's really difficult to predict technology. But right now, we've not got the infrastructure, particularly in certain countries, and even ignore certain countries. Some parts of even the more developed countries just don't have the internet connections. We don't have the limitations yet on local compute to make it even slightly worth it. Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo simply aren't willing to give up that level of control. With 4K TVs coming around, it's going to even be more bandwidth required, and there's so many different other avenues that we could discuss, but I'm sure you get the idea. Anyway, guys, it's been a bit of a itsy-bitsy video. Hopefully you've stuck with me through it, and if so, give yourself a pat on the back, soldier. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.